Welcome to this explainer on what's being called the Great Repricing. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating July 2026 intelligence briefing. It lays out this dramatic, high-stakes collision between our massive, almost infinite digital ambitions and our very real, very finite physical world.
Let's just jump right in with a pretty staggering number, minus $889.3 billion. That right there is the single-day value destruction of the Magnificent Seven tech stocks. We're literally talking about an absolute wealth wipeout that happened in just a matter of hours, completely shattering any sense of market complacency.
And, this equity wipeout didn't happen in a vacuum. Right as we saw that massive loss in tech, Brent crude oil breached $100 a barrel for the first time in months. Oh, and the 10-year Treasury yield, it spiked to 4.703%. This global dashboard is essentially flashing bright red, warning us that we're violently returning to a risk-off environment. Suddenly, cash and hard assets reign supreme.
So, to figure out exactly how we got here, we're going to map out the initial collision, look at the geopolitical choke points, hit the AI reality check, track the resulting inflation and macroeconomic contagion, and finally, wrap up with your new investment playbook.
Okay, starting off with Section 1, digital ambitions hit physical walls, where Wall Street's trillion-dollar bets are slamming into undeniable physical limits.
We're seeing this really stark, honestly fascinating contrast between our digital dreams and our physical realities. Think about the immense capital demands of cloud infrastructure. It's running red hot, right at 92% capacity utilization. But those digital dreams? They are getting squeezed hard by critical, real-world physical bottlenecks. Specifically, we're talking about constricted transit routes at the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz. It's like we're trying to build infinite data centers, but the actual physical ships needed to move the materials and energy to build them are just stuck in traffic.
That perfectly sets up Section 2, the geopolitical choke points and the illusion of security.
The crucial thing to understand here is how a perceived solution actually turned into a massive trap. The market thought, hey, we found a secure supply chain route by shifting oil shipments overland through Saudi Arabia's Yanbu terminal, completely avoiding the Strait of Hormuz. Seems smart, right? Well, tracking the geography reveals a fatal flaw. 98.6% of those barrels shipping from Yanbu ended up bottlenecked right at another critical point, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So this supposed fix ended up dangerously compromising 12% of the entire world's seaborne oil supply.
Ian Solis over at Wood Mackenzie hits the nail on the head here. He says, quote, "What looked like diversification was in reality a shift from one strategic bottleneck to another. The global economy essentially just played a high-stakes game of musical chairs with its most vital energy routes, and, well, the music just stopped."
This creates a wild juxtaposition between two completely out-of-phase economic cycles. On one hand, you have the deflating digital cycle. Generative AI, massive compute demand, it's heavily speculative, and the return on investment isn't even expected until the 2030s. But on the other hand, you have a booming physical cycle. Supply chain reshoring and national security pledges are driving actual, active construction today, offering immediate returns. So the digital world is wiping out billions a day, while the physical world is experiencing its biggest infrastructure build-out since the 19th century railroads.
And that brings us right to Section 3, the AI reality check, where we look at what's violently dragging down those tech markets. Let's look at how this builds into what the briefing calls the CapEx chasm. You've got hyperscalers, companies like Alphabet and Tesla, just burning billions of dollars. They're dropping into negative free cash flow as they massively outspend their operating cash to fund these future AI ambitions. But the physical supply track? It tells a completely different story. The next generation energy actually required to power those AI ambitions, things like advanced geothermal or new nuclear power, it simply won't exist at scale until the 2030s. Investors are suddenly realizing they're paying peak valuation multiples today for power narratives that literally cannot physically happen for almost a decade.
Those immense physical and energy constraints naturally lead into Section 4, the inflationary ripple effect.
Now, central banks are incredibly powerful for sure, but they have a massive blind spot. Monetary policy can't magically unblock a shipping street. It can't print fertilizer. It can't pump more oil out of the ground. Because of fertilizer disruptions in the Middle East, we aren't just seeing oil prices spike. Cross-commodity linkages are dragging wheat futures up 22% and corners up 13%, right alongside crude oil. It's a genuine commodities cascade. As these essential baseline prices shoot up, we move into Section 5, the macro contagion, where we see how this begins to paralyze everyday consumers on Main Street. This creates a pretty punishing chain reaction. Higher oil prices naturally amplify inflation fears, which directly drives up the 10-year Treasury yield.
and that yield acts as an independent, brutal brake on the U.S. economy. We're seeing 30-year fixed mortgage rates climbing all the way to 6.85%. And since median home prices are sitting at a record $440,600, buyer confidence is just completely erased. The housing market is effectively frozen solid.
So, looking at this massive convergence of data, the absolute crucial question we have to ask ourselves is this. With commodity inflation rising on one hand and the tech sector completely crashing on the other, what on earth does the Federal Reserve do in this impossible scenario? According to the briefing, Fed Chair Kevin Warsh is trapped in a true live decision with no easy way out. The case to hike rates is pretty clear-cut, right? Oil is over $100, commodity inflation is surging, and overall inflation has been above target for over 5 years. But the case to hold rates steady is just as intense. The tech sector is in a brutal sell-off. 4.7% Treasury yields are already severely tightening financial conditions, and there's immense political pressure heading into midterm elections. It is an absolute deadlock.
And when you factor in the long-term demographic math, the picture actually gets even more intense. If we want to fix the housing affordability crisis over the next 10 years without causing a total collapse, the math dictates we need 7% wage growth combined with flat nominal housing prices. That requires a 3% real rate, which ultimately points to a staggering 10% Treasury yield target. Now, massive tech companies, they might survive a 10% yield, but this represents an existential threat, a devastating refinancing cliff for sectors built entirely on a foundation of cheap money, like private equity and private credit.
So, to survive this massive global paradigm shift, we turn to our final section, the new investment playbook.
What's really fascinating about this playbook is just how decisive the shift needs to be. Investors must aggressively rotate and defend. In equities, that means abandoning companies with negative free cash flow that are just funding speculative 2030s narratives and moving into stuff like industrials and manufacturing. Over in fixed income, you've got to prepare for structural inflation and some extreme tail risk in leveraged private markets. And finally, for real assets, the mandate is incredibly clear. Geopolitical choke points are structural. They are not temporary. Commodities and physical infrastructure now offer the absolute most robust hedge against these twin economic shocks.
I'm going to leave you with this final, vital thought to take away from our explainer today. The low inflation, cheap money architecture of the 1980s, it has been completely dismantled. The digital dream has essentially hit the physical wall. So as you look at your own strategies moving forward, you really have to ask yourself, are you positioned for a world ruled by physical anchors?